Jerusalem, broadcasting from the JNS studios. I am privileged to be here together with Yaakov Lappin, our JNS military analyst. My name is Alex Traiman. I'm the CEO and Jerusalem bureau chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. And we are here with a special live emergency war briefing. As you know, Operation Midnight Hammer took place last night. The United States doing what everyone was wondering if would ever happen at all, the bombing of the Fordow nuclear site in Iran, in addition to the Natanz site and the Isfahan nuclear sites. Yaakov, what do we know about the U.S. strikes last night?
Well, the preliminary information is that the U.S. did indeed send a group of B-2 Spirit strategic bombers. At first, they were pretending it seems to be flying to Guam, but it looks like they flew directly to their targets over the Iranian nuclear sites that they struck. And of course, Fordow is the biggest target, the most important target, because this is the target that was buried under 80 meters or so of earth and concrete, what makes most conventional, even bunker busters, difficult to reach. These B-2 bombers dropped the GBU-57 massive ordnance bomb, which can tunnel way down tens of meters into the ground, into cliff, into earth, into concrete, and cause very heavy damage. Now, Fordow is the one site that Israel did not touch because it was waiting to see whether the United States would join this war and take on that target, which is, so well suited to these very, very unique American strategic strike capabilities. And that's exactly what happened overnight. And Fordow is a site it doesn't have that many centrifuges spinning in it. It's about 3,000 according to intelligence estimates, compared to tens of thousands of centrifuges that were spinning at Natanz before Israel struck that. But it was the place where the Iranian regime wanted to create military-grade uranium at Fordow, so it was a very, very important site to take out. And in terms of the battle damage assessment, what militaries and intelligence communities do, we're going to have to wait for real detail on this. But I think it's safe to assume that any target that gets hit with that kind of ordnance, that kind of firepower, is going to be very heavily damaged. Now, the interesting thing is that the American strike didn't stop there. It also targeted Natanz, and it also targeted Isfahan. And Isfahan is another very critical site. So is Natanz, of course, but at Isfahan, according to Israeli intelligence assessments, the Iranians wanted to take 60% uranium and turn it into 90%. So what happened to that 60% uranium stockpile? Has it been buried under an avalanche? We don't have the answer. We believe that it's in Isfahan, and it might now be buried under some avalanche because of this American strike. So we don't know what happened there. We'll have to wait. And Natanz, which has also been hit repeatedly by Israel, was also hit by this historic American strike. So we're looking at 3 nuclear sites, all of them hit. Some of them were hit by Tomahawk missiles reportedly launched from American submarines. So this is very much a combined strike, bringing the capabilities that only the world's greatest military superpower can bring to the table. This is definitely a historic day, Alex. This is the day when the United States and the Trump administration made it clear that it's not going to normalize the Ayatollah Shiite jihadist regime. It's not going to tolerate its rush to nuclear weapons, and it's standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel. So this is a very important historic day all around, I would say, for the free world.
Now, we didn't know whether the Trump administration was going to launch this attack. A lot of talk this way or that. It seemed like there was a lot of tension around the president's decision. And it's not clear that Israel really knew that the president was going to take that decision. Did Israel have its own contingency plans to hit Fordow if the United States didn't do that?
So the answer, as far as I can tell, is definitely yes. Israel had contingency plans to strike Fordow. Military planners who've already exhibited, such out-of-the-box thinking in the way that they took on Natanz, Isfahan, the Arak nuclear site, which was the plutonium channel to nuclear weapons, as opposed to the uranium. All of these sites have already sustained very heavy damage. And it seems clear to me, even though it was never said explicitly, because obviously, Israeli defense officials are not going to signal what they're doing next, what they're planning next. But it seemed clear to me that the Israeli defense establishment did have contingency strike plans for Fordow. I don't know what exactly those plans were. They remain, classified information, but I think we can imagine that Israel had a range of options, either from the air or perhaps not only from the air, to take on the site of Fordow. And luckily, we didn't have to find out because the United States stepped up to the plate and brought its world, unique firepower. But to answer your question, in my mind at least, there is no doubt that Israel had its own contingency, and that's based on the doctrine of the need for Israel to be able to take on every existential threat by itself if necessary. So the idea that it can outsource any and gamble on that outsourcing, gamble its existence on dealing with any existential threat, I think is a violation of Israel's defense doctrine. And so I think that those plans were definitely there, Alex. They just didn't have to be utilized, thankfully.
Now, the U.S. they came in with these B-2 stealth bombers. Reports are they came in completely undetected into Iranian airspace, and we're only now starting to see some of the images. I mean, we had seen some video of looked like a massive explosion that took place overnight, but now I just took a look at what I saw first, satellite images, and what you could see is you would expect if they had dropped like 6 of these MOP, massive ordnance penetrator bombs, that the whole mountain would be gone. But it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like you could see like pinpoint holes in the mountain, and there were reports that the strikes went through the ventilator shaft from the nuclear reactor. Do we know anything about exactly how these targets were hit, and if there's any way of knowing, how far down these bombs could have penetrated, and when Israel or the United States will be able to assess how much damage was actually done to the facility?
So, I think that the assessments are happening as we speak, and I'm sure that CENTCOM, the Pentagon, the United States Air Force will brief the Israeli Air Force, the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate, as soon as they know their own BDA, their battle damage assessment. But to your point about, the mountain itself, the point of the MOP is to drill down. It's supposed to go down into the ground very, very deep and then explode. And that is a very, difficult technical feat to achieve. So what that means is that the damage is not going to be visible from the explosion, from the outside, even satellite imagery, which will probably give some clues about how far the missiles, the bombs dropped. You have to basically put together a whole puzzle piece of information in order to get a picture of what the actual battle damage assessment is. So this is the work of many trained experts. They're going to bring in a whole stream of information from multiple sources, and then they'll be able to say the uranium enrichment site at Fordow has been damaged to this degree. It will take them X number of months or years to repair. There will be very concrete criteria to establish what the damage is to the centrifuges, to the power supply, to any personnel who may have been suicidal enough to remain there, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very sort of scientific, intelligence-based effort. It's well beyond the means of the mainstream media or any other kind of media to be able to do. So we have to wait for the intelligence assessments. But again, I think if we look at the capabilities on paper, what these MOPs are capable of doing, it seems to me that it's well within their range to cause heavy damage to an entrenched site like Fordow, specifically because they were designed to do this, Alex. This was their one job, is to drill deep and explode. And if you launch one after another into the same point, I find it difficult to imagine that Fordow could emerge without extremely serious damage to the whole uranium enrichment enterprise that was going down under that mountain near Qom.
And I did see something reported that J.D. Vance had came out and said that they believe that they set back the Iranian nuclear program by years, but that the goal was not to delay Iran's nuclear program by years. The goal was that the Iranians should never be able to develop nuclear weapons. Now, the United States was not operating by itself overnight, and we spoke a week ago here at our first emergency war briefing, just less than 48 hours after this Operation Rising Like a Lion began here with Israeli airstrikes on Iran. And maybe we can discuss what has happened between that initial shock and awe that Israel flashed when it struck, and the shock and awe of the Trump administration last night when it hit Fordow and Natanz and Isfahan. What's happened in between? And then we'll also talk about what's happened in the last 24, 48 hours.
Right. So if we look at the three main goals of Israel's Operation Rising Lion, it's to significantly damage the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranian missile program, the ballistic missile program, and what the IDF is calling the destruction of Israel program, which is Iran's proxy support and maintenance program. Now, between the last time we spoke and now, I can tell you from information that I have seen consistently on a daily basis, there has been massive damage caused to all three existential threats. They're all three strands of one larger Iranian program to annihilate the state of Israel. The nuclear program has already been heavily damaged even before the US entered the equation. And we know that because all of the components that are needed for a nuclear program, the uranium enrichment sites, Isfahan and Natanz, the production of centrifuges, those are the machines that spin around and create uranium enriched at a higher and higher level, and all of the various logistics that feed this system, they were all systematically struck by the Israeli Air Force time and time again. In fact, just on Saturday, we were briefed by an IDF official who said that the Israeli Air Force went back to Isfahan, went back to Natanz, and struck again and again. And that's all due to the Israeli air superiority. Once the Israeli Air Force has the ability to fly over any part of Iran uncontested by surface-to-air missile threats, what's happening is that there are people going over the intelligence of what was damaged and does it need a second run, a third run, and that capability is enabled by the fact that Israel has full aerial superiority in Iranian airspace, and so what that means is that nuclear sites are being hit again and again, and the various systems that feed and nourish the Iranian program are also being hit, as well as the Iranian nuclear scientific community being hunted down and really just systematically pursued by incredible intelligence. Now, the other thing to look out for is the Iranian missile program. From the last estimate that I heard, more than 50% of the surface-to-surface missile launchers that Iran had, most of them in western Iran, but some of them were being moved to central and eastern Iran, more than 50% of those launchers are inoperable.
Do we have any idea of when we say 50% of what number we're talking about?
Yeah.
How many?
So we're
missile
talking
launches
about 200 surface-to-surface missile launchers. So that's a little bit more than 50% out of approximately 400 of their launchers. Now, it's not like the other launchers are ready for use. The Iranian military is frightened to go near these launchers because they see that many of them simply don't survive the drive to the missile launch points. So this has created a real fear factor, and therefore the Iranian launch chain of command is suffering real disarray. And we can see that, Alex. We can see that because 8-9 days ago we were getting volleys of 100, 120 missiles, and now we're getting volleys of 20, 25 missiles at the very most, and that is an unmistakable indication of their decreasing firing capability.
Right. So some of these missile launchers at this point, they're one-time use launchers because the IDF is scouring the skies, and if they see missiles being launched from a certain place, just as they can pinpoint where they're going, they can pinpoint exactly where they've come from, and they're taking them out. So if Iran uses it, the chances are that they're not going to get to use it again.
Yeah, that's very true. They also have, radar indications, so they can see, where the missiles go up from. So absolutely, every day that goes by, the Iranians are losing missile launchers, and that's actually more important than even the number of missiles, because I always compare it to, guns and bullets. If you don't have enough guns, it doesn't matter how many bullets you've got in your cupboard, you can't shoot. So that's what's happening in terms of their launcher capability.
What do we know about the missile capabilities, just in terms of the numbers, the assessment of how many they had, how many Israel has hit, and how many Iran has already fired, how many they have left?
Right. So the assessment going into this war is that Iran had approximately 2,000 surface-to-surface missiles, but it's important to stress that this does not include a breakdown of their range. So out of that 2,000, I don't think that meant that all 2,000 could hit Israel, and that number is deliberately being kept classified because it's an intelligence assessment, and Israel doesn't necessarily want Iran to know what all of its assessments are. But they certainly had a very substantial number of missiles that could reach Israel. And I think that in addition to the launchers, what we're seeing is missile production sites, missile storage sites, missile bases, some of them underground with just sort of hatches, in at the edges of cliffs that are designed to fire and disappear as a launch site. They're being hit systematically, Alex, and this is all an indication of the incredible intelligence that has been gathered before the war and during the war. And I just want to stress the real-time gathering of intelligence, how important it is, how much of a game changer it is. What it really means is that the Israeli Air Force, when it's operating over Iran in shifts, and the Israeli Air Force sends out 30, 40, 50, 60 jets on missions, those jets will be getting real-time intelligence that they didn't even necessarily have when they took off from Israeli bases. So that basically operationally means that they're operating as if, they're taking out enemy targets in Gaza, in Lebanon, on the same exact basis because of Israel's ability to get the intelligence, to decipher it, and send it back to the jets as they're over Iran. This creates a real-time loop, a targeting loop, and this has proven to be a real game changer that operates in Israel's advantage and to Iran's severe disadvantage. So that's what's enabling many of these missile launchers, missile bases to be taken out, and the military command structure. So the third part of the of this operation is designed to severely roll back Iran's ability to operate its proxies, and what that means is literally killing Quds Force commanders who were in charge of basically funding and managing and coordinating with Hamas, with Hezbollah. So the two commanders who were in charge of that in the Quds Force have been eliminated in recent days. This is a major blow. These people are seen as just as important as Qasem Soleimani, if not more so. They're not easily replaced. They represent years and years of experience and connections and building the trust of the terrorist proxies that they were operating. These are definitely people who were involved in the planning of the 7th of October, in the idea of surrounding Israel with this ring of fire to, rain down fire from Gaza and Lebanon on us and to enable the 7th of October, which Iran certainly helped plan and promote. So killing these commanders is a major blow in that third component of the Iranian plan to destroy us, which is the proxy program. And therefore, what you're seeing, if you zoom out, is really serious damage to the nuclear program, to the missile program, and to the proxy program. All three are happening. All three are being struck every single day.
Let's talk a little bit about the proxies. It was always believed that the proxies, and particularly Hezbollah, the largest and the most powerful of the proxies, was the deterrent force that Iran had to prevent Israel or anyone else from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. Because if Israel would attack Iran, then you'd have this rain of missiles coming from southern Lebanon on Israel. And what we've seen is, as Israel's taken out first Hamas in Gaza and then shifted the war front to southern Lebanon, they've taken out, according to the Israeli assessments, something like 80% of Hezbollah's missile capabilities. And that would still leave 20% of the missile capabilities left. And we heard calls early on for Hezbollah to get involved in this conflict to help defend Iran. And yet we haven't seen that happen. And at the same time, we haven't really seen much out of the Houthis in Yemen either in terms of stepping up attacks on Israel. Can we talk a little bit about what has deterred Hezbollah and the Houthis from attacking Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think Hezbollah, as you said, one of its main goals was to try and deter Israel from striking the Iranian nuclear program. But since Israel so brilliantly took out most of Hezbollah's capabilities and leadership back in September and October of 2024, as you said, 80% of their rocket firepower, their invasion bases in southern Lebanon were pulled out of the ground and destroyed. And their entire, leadership and field command was destroyed by the Beeper attacks. So Hezbollah is under massive pressure because it's so weak right now militarily that in Lebanon, the anti-Hezbollah elements, the Lebanese government, the Sunnis, the Christians, the various Lebanese who don't want to see Lebanon dragged into another war, they are putting serious pressure on Hezbollah and telling it, do not drag us into another war. You've already lost the last war against Israel. Now, if you add to that the daily strikes that are ongoing against Hezbollah, and this has been a little bit overshadowed by the various developments in Iran, but not a day goes by when a Hezbollah commander from its elite Radwan unit, for example, or Hezbollah infrastructure or rocket launching zones are not struck by the Israeli Air Force. This effort is ongoing and daily. So when you combine both of those things, Hezbollah is very limited in what it can do. If it chooses to escalate, that will just give Israel an excuse to take away more of its capabilities, and it doesn't want that. It wants to rebuild. It wants to use this time to try and rebuild. And so really, it's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Whatever it's going to do, it's going to lose in this scenario. But one thing I think we can say for sure, the Iranian logic, right? The whole Iranian grand claim that Hezbollah is there to protect the Iranian regime. Hezbollah is there to promote the Iranian jihadist ideology and to fight Israel when the hour of need will come. That idea has fallen apart. Israel, by systematically working through Hamas, Hezbollah, and then reaching the head of the tentacle, by dismembering its tentacles and then reaching the head of the octopus, I should say. Once it reaches the head and the arms are not there, the tentacles are not there to help the head, that demolishes Iran's entire proxy strategy, and they find themselves alone, state-on-state conflict against Israel, and now the United States. So this is a real collapse, Alex, of the Iranian strategy, and it was accomplished by this systematic, patient determination by Israel to go after Hamas, then to go after Hezbollah, and then to go after Iran. That was the correct order to prosecute this war, and now we are seeing the benefits. I think this is going to cause Iranian regime credibility enormous damage in the eyes of its own base, in the eyes of its own people, and they're going to have a lot of, I think, internal problems as well, because they've invested so much money in Hezbollah. All the tens of billions of dollars that they invest every single year in Hezbollah, and now Hezbollah, as of now, is nowhere to be seen in the battle zone. It is simply not interested and not really able to join the fray, and this is a real collapse of the Iranian strategy.
Now, Israel had seen intelligence that suggested that the Iranian plan was actually to have all of its terror proxies and potentially itself firing missiles and in addition to firing missiles, also crossing Israel's border with ground troops simultaneously. Right, so there's the question of, and the Prime Minister has spoken about this, that Hamas actually jumped the gun on October 7th, went in ahead of Hezbollah and ahead of Iran, perhaps without those other proxies being aware in advance that this was going to happen, and just kind of assuming that Hezbollah and the others would join in when they saw the initial October 7th operation taking place. And so, again, a big miscalculation maybe by Hamas, but also a miscalculation by Hezbollah and Iran not to enter the fray simultaneously, because had they all entered the fray simultaneously, we saw how unprepared Israel was only for the Gazan front on October 7th. And certainly Israel mobilized troops immediately after October 7th, also on the northern border, to deter Hezbollah. But had Hezbollah just come even at those early moments, perhaps they could have really overrun Israeli defenses, both the ground defenses and also the air defenses. And so we've seen that Israel had the benefit of being able to decide to take the terror proxies on one at a time, which has proven to be the right strategy, and also has given Israel the time it needed to put the air defenses into place, right? I mean, the amount of timing between deciding when it was going to shift focus to Hezbollah, and then the amount of time after President Trump came into office to allow Israel to restock both the offensive weapons and the defensive weapons to be able to feel safe, as safe as you can feel, to tackle the Iranian ballistic missile and nuclear threat. So all of these forces really came together in a way that really benefited Israel, and perhaps in a way that Israel couldn't have predicted had all of these attacks simultaneously on October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The fact that Hezbollah didn't join a full-scale ground assault, and let's remember, this whole idea of invading border areas, mass murdering civilians, kidnapping Israelis, this was originally a Hezbollah idea in terms of implementation. They had a plan called the Conquer the Galilee plan, and Hamas in many ways copied and pasted that plan and applied it to the Western Negev. So it is a really big question about why they didn't why didn't do their attack simultaneously. It is somewhat of a strategic miracle, I would say, that didn't happen, because I don't think we were much better prepared in the north on that terrible day that we were in the south. And as you say, as soon as Hamas launched its attack, Hezbollah lost the element of surprise, was not able to basically send thousands of highly trained Rud-1 death squad unit members, which is what they had planned to do, into northern Israel. They could have possibly reached as far south as Tiberias and Haifa, Alex, and it would have been horrific. And we really, it is a miracle that they didn't do that. And there are many speculations about why. There's one theory which basically holds that Iran was interested in creating, let's call it a major war in Israel's south, and to keep Hezbollah halfway in the war, halfway out of the war, so that it could use this all as a distraction to break out into nuclear weapons. This is one theory that the Alma Center has been working on. And there are other theories as well. There are theories that saying, no, actually, Hamas really did surprise the fellow members of its terrorist axis, and that it really just sort of jumped the gun. I think at the end of the day, when I try to make sense of that particular question, there's a lot of information now coming out about the level of coordination between Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah. And one thing is definitely clear: Hezbollah and Iran knew that Hamas was planning on launching on October 7th style massive ground attack and massacre. They absolutely knew about it because Hamas told them about it, and we have documents showing the meetings between the heads of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Quds Force. These are documents that have been seized by the IDF in the Gaza Strip. And even more recently, Azedi, who was the commander of the Quds branch in the Quds Force, it's called the Jerusalem branch of the Quds Force. He was in charge of basically managing Hamas, and he had full knowledge of Hamas's plans to launch a mass murder ground attack. So the question of whether they knew exactly what day would happen or not remains open. There are many, speculations about that, but there's no question that Iran knew about these plans, promoted them, encouraged them, and absolutely fitted in with Iran's goal of destroying Israel. And that's why they armed Hamas. That's why they trained them. That's why they shared doctrines with them, taught them how to build weapons in Gaza, smuggled weapons to them. So there's no way that Iran didn't know about Hamas's intentions. In fact, Hamas shared all of its plans with Iran, and the Iranians approved them. And we know that, again, because the documents exist.
Let's move back to the most recent, Operation Rising Lion. We've talked a little bit about the types of targets that Israel has hit. Maybe we can discuss a little bit of how successful Israel has been at flying the skies between Israel and Iran. We're talking about distances of 1,500 kilometers, having to refuel at certain points, probably on the way back. But do we have any idea how many sorties Israel's run, how many planes are involved? And, you talked about miracles before, but from what I understand, we haven't lost a single plane or a single pilot in the 9 days of which this most dangerous, daring operation has taken place. Can you tell us a little bit more about just the Israeli air superiority here, dominance in the skies?
Sure. So we're talking about over 1,000 sorties already, involving hundreds of aircraft, and it's all of the types of aircraft that Israel has at its disposal. So it's the F-16s, it's the F-15s, it's the F-35s, it's the full range of long-range attack and surveillance drones that Israel has. Some of them are made by IAI, some of them are made by Elbit. At the end of the day, Israel has thrown the full weight of its air power into this campaign, obviously. And so it's hundreds of aircrafts that are just constantly working in shifts. And again, I think the key to this is the real-time intelligence, because at some point in a campaign, it always begins with the established intelligence targets. There's a whole database of targets, and the jets, get that information, get the target coordinates. They have to choose each and every target, how it's going to be struck, what kind of munition, where will it be fired from, what the angle of attack will be for the munition that's dropped from the aircraft. This is pinpoint planning that really boggles the mind when you get into these kinds of resolutions. But then what happens is during the campaign is that real-time targets emerge. And because we're talking about 1,000 miles away, such a distant arena from Israel's perspective and so much further than what Israel's used to, Israel has had to basically create a new chapter in its aerial warfare book. And this chapter is all about how to get the real-time intelligence to the jets. And that often means that when they're taking off from the bases here, they don't necessarily know what they're going to strike on the way. Sometimes they know, especially at the beginning of the war, but by the time they reach Iranian airspace at this stage of the war, they might be getting new coordinates. And that kind of flexibility, I think, has again proven to be a real game changer, what has allowed Israel to stay on top of this war and on top of those Iranian targets in real time. So it's more than 1,000 sorties. It's hundreds of aircraft. It's a very large number of munitions of every kind that we can imagine.
How many targets hit?
I think the targets would be approaching the thousands at this stage, but I don't have an exact number on the targets hit. But I think we can talk about thousands of targets in Iran that have already been hit all in total. And I think that that number is obviously just going to keep growing.
And what about the state of the pilots? I mean, you're talking about a significant number of hours that each pilot has to be in the air just for a singular strike. We don't know how many strikes a particular pilot can make with whatever payloads that he or she has on the flight. Are they able to get back? Are they able to rest? How many pilots does Israel have? Or what do we have any idea like how the pilots are holding up and recharging their batteries? Because the human capital here seems to be just as important as the hardware of the planes and the hardware of the munitions.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the pilots I think are in their cockpits way longer than in any previous war, right? Because it takes at least 2 to 3 hours, I think, in every direction. They have to be refueled, obviously, and there have been over 600 refueling flights, which in itself for Israel is a massive number of refueling sorties. And so, if we're talking about a 5-6 hour mission on average for every time, and they might be, judging by the amount of shifts that they're doing, they might be doing 2 of these a day, Alex, 2 of these per 24 hours to keep up this continuous rate of aerial punches. So I imagine that the pilots are going to be tired. Now, they're obviously going to be encouraged to sleep when they're not in the air. I hope that they are able to sleep, but I think the one thing that is going to really help keep them going is the sense of success. I think that when you're on a team that is winning, that is clearly winning, it's much easier to overcome fatigue and all the various challenges that are going to be faced by pilots because of their own physical limitations. Obviously, they've been trained for this. They've trained for months and years for this mission. But there's no question that fatigue is going to be something they have to contend with. But I think that because they see that the operation that they are spearheading is so historic, so successful, that's going to help keep the adrenaline going. And also, by the way, I think that the tension, they spoke about this in the first days, that the tension was so big, when they got the order that this is it. That thing you've been training for so long, the green light has arrived from the security cabinet and it's time to go. I think once that tension is broken, once you rip off the Band-Aid, they got into the routine of doing this. And what seemed, unimaginable before this war, flying to Tehran, taking out an X number of targets, flying back, reloading the jet, with the munitions and going up, with your wingmen for another one. They've gotten into this routine and I think they're psychologically fueled by the success, and it's just giving them an appetite to keep going for as long as is needed. So there's no question, I've taught I encourage my sons when they see these jets, because we have a base not far from our home, the automatic instinct is really to salute them, quite literally to salute them, because what they are doing is historic for the people of Israel. They're guaranteeing our future here, and the risks that they're taking are massive, Alex. There's no question that they've taken enormous risks to be able to guarantee our security here. So all we can feel for them is an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I think that's the way every Israeli citizen feels towards the men and women that make up the Israeli Air Force.
Now, we did see a report that a singular drone had crashed in Iran. You saw Iranians standing next to this crashed drone. Do we know how the drones have performed?
So the drones, from my understanding, have performed above and beyond expectations. There is a risk of shooting them down because the Iranians, and they've passed this technology on, they've proliferated this onto the Houthis and to Hezbollah. They do have certain surface-to-air missiles that are pretty portable, that are not a real threat to jets, but they are a threat to a kind of drone which is called a medium altitude, long endurance drone, that it's hyphenated for male. Drones. And some of those drones are of the type that Israel flies. The US lost quite a few of these drones over Yemen. So that required, I think, Israeli operational planners to go back to the drawing board and make sure that those drones operate in a way, at an altitude, at a range that keeps them out of the line of fire. So I think losing one, maybe a little more than one, we don't have the exact number, is actually probably lower than what the assessment would have been going into this war in light of Iran's ability to target these drones with these kinds of surface-to-air missiles that they themselves developed. By the way, this is Iranian technology. So I think the drones have performed exceptionally well in terms of their ability to evade that. Now, in terms of what the drones are doing, it's quite phenomenal. I would assume, based on everything I've studied about these drones, that they're gathering every kind of intelligence possible, whether it's visual intelligence. Some of them have payloads that can collect electronic intelligence, communications intelligence, and all of this intelligence comes into control centers. So what you can do with this intelligence, and I'm speaking generally now, not necessarily about one specific operation, but what you can do with this intelligence is build a multi-layered map of the arena that you're dealing with. And they can use all kinds of technology to flag targets, get that intelligence to the jets, as I've said earlier. So the drones are essential not only for attacking targets, and they can hover over areas for much longer than jets, but they can also really be a long-term eye in the sky, sensor in the sky, and really help Israel maintain a fixed surveillance presence over Iranian skies.
Now, we're talking about drones. Drones have also been a part of the Iranian arsenal. The reports were that Iran has fired over 480 drones at Israel, and until just maybe 24, 48 hours ago, there were no direct hits by Iranian drones on the Israeli home front. Yesterday, we saw that drone for the first time hit in Beit Shan, and that there may have been a second drone that hit as well. And certainly there have been several that have entered into Israeli territory, but still out of, I guess, close to 500 drones. The shoot down rates of these by the Israeli Air Force have been incredible. What do we know about the Iranian drones?
So the Iranian drone is like the second component of their attack capability. They gambled on ballistic missiles, and they gambled on offensive UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. And the UAVs, I mean, they're much cruder, they're much cheaper, they travel much slower, but the Iranian hope was that they would be able to bypass our radar detection capabilities and to be able to bring their payloads, which is explosives, much less than a missile warhead, but certainly still dangerous, and to strike various targets to terrorize the civilians in Israel, to hit strategic targets in Israel. This plan has failed. We can say that much for sure by this stage. I think that the percentage of interception is 99%. It might be a little bit less than that, but it's not much less. It's at the very, very high 90s is the percentage rate. And that is due to the fact that these drones are being detected in time, are being shot down by a whole range of capabilities. So it's not just one thing that Israel is relying on to deal with these UAVs. It's helicopters, it's Apache helicopters that are machine gunning these drones. They fly much faster to them. So at any given moment, there are Apaches that are patrolling Israel's skies and borders, and they are on the lookout when they receive word from command of a drone heading our way. They will shoot it down. There are ships that are taking part in this interception, and for the first time in recent days, a new missile defense system called Barak, which is on board Israeli missile ships, but has also now been activated by the Israeli Air Force. In other words, from the ground, was used to intercept a drone. So we're seeing new capabilities coming online even as this war is occurring. And I think that's the whole advantage of the Israeli system. You have all these redundancies. So if one layer doesn't work, you activate another. And the less you're dependent on a single layer, the more likely you are to catch these kinds of threats in time. So the drone threat, I would say, has very, very successfully been contained. I don't know of any casualties from drone attacks. There was one hit. I think the first known hit occurred yesterday in Bet Shan, which is on the Jordan Valley in the north. There was a drone that struck a building, but everybody was in the shelter, so nobody was injured. It did cause some serious damage. It is a threat, but the vast, vast majority of these UAVs are not getting through, Alex.
When you talk about the multi-layer defense, we've talked about it a little bit in the past. The ballistic missile defenses, the Arrow 3, which can target in the atmosphere, and then the Arrow 2, which can hit a little bit lower, the David Sling, and then even the Iron Dome, which is able to hit closer to the ground. In the beginning, we saw that Iran was firing more missiles, but seemingly less were getting through. And if they did get through, they were doing a little bit less damage, seemingly because they were less sophisticated missiles, maybe traveled a little bit slower, maybe only Mach 6 as opposed to like Mach 12, or that some of these others can travel and had lesser payloads. But we have seen a little bit of a progression in terms of the types of missiles that Iran has fired, larger missiles, larger payloads, also reportedly some cluster bombs that they've been sending that kind of break off and then hit multiple targets. What do we know about the Iranian missile capabilities and what they've been firing?
So we know that Iran has fired every kind of missile that it can. And it has a range. So most of these missiles you could classify as IMAD type missiles. And there are also a whole bunch of missiles that are variants of the Shahab 3. So to make things simpler, Iran has two main types of missiles. One is liquid fueled and one is solid fueled. The Iranians have been firing both, and they've definitely started to use more than once warheads that splinter off, cluster munitions, to try and cause as much damage to civilian areas as possible. Now, in terms of interception rates, we don't have official numbers, but one thing is for sure, the big majority of these threats are being intercepted. The missile launchers that are not hit, the ones that remain functional, when they fire missiles, the detection system goes into action immediately, and that gives the system some time, the Arrow 3 system, to start planning its interception trajectory. So we are seeing the big majority of missiles intercepted. Now, a missile that has a splintering warhead, if it's intercepted in space, that warhead will be completely irrelevant. It will be blown up in space, and it won't have the chance to enter the atmosphere. If it gets into the atmosphere, if it re-enters, which is why the missile experts keep focusing on this thing called a re-entry vehicle. That's actually the part of the missile that basically splits off from the engine, splits off from the fuel tank, and continues coming down at its target. That's the warhead. That's the part that contains all the explosives, this re-entry vehicle. If the re-entry vehicle that has a cluster munitions on it, if it enters the atmosphere, then it becomes much more difficult to intercept, because instead of one warhead, we're looking at about 20. It splits off into 20 smaller warheads. So they still try to intercept those 20. It's obviously harder, and it's designed to saturate and confuse the air defense system. It's definitely a challenge, Alex. There's no question about it. But as long as most of those threats are still being intercepted in space by Arrow 3, which they are, that means that most of these clustered bomb warheads will not get through. The ones that do get through are extremely dangerous, extremely hazardous, and we've seen that on more than one occasion in recent days being fired by the Iranians. Certainly gives us a taste of what the Iranians were preparing for us, because their plan was within about 2 years to build about 8,000 times 6 would have looked like in terms of their arsenal.
What else do we know about what Iran's missile capabilities could be, aside from what we've seen, aside from the ballistic missiles? Questions about whether Iran has biological weapons, chemical weapons, potentially could have assembled some kind of crude nuclear bomb of some sorts, whether or not they could get it on a warhead, and what does Israel suspect could be a retaliation now for what seems to be a very, very successful strikes on Iran and their nuclear facilities?
So I say cautiously when it comes to Israel. I think Iran is applying all of its capabilities that it can. It's activating everything that it can and has been doing that since day one. I don't believe that the Iranians are able to, in terms of missiles, activate more than what they've already tried to launch in our direction. They also, one other things that they could do specifically against Israeli and Jewish targets is obviously try to activate their international terrorism network. That's a big threat, and Jews and Israelis who are overseas absolutely do have to be vigilant to that kind of threat, especially at synagogues and of course embassies. All of the obvious targets. These are definitely things that the Iranians could look to try and hit as part of their jihadist revenge for this attack, and certainly that's something that law enforcement has to work together with intelligence, and local communities have to be very, very vigilant because that is a real threat, unfortunately. Now,
Now,
in terms of the
go ahead.
wider threat, the Iranians are right now trying to figure out how they're going to respond to the American attack. They've basically got two options, which they, if they had any sense left in them, and I'm not convinced that they do, they wouldn't activate either. But one would be to, I mentioned 2,000 missiles going into this. Many of those missiles are shorter range missiles, medium range ballistic missiles that are designed to hit American targets in the Middle East, like American air bases, in the Gulf, and et cetera, et cetera. So they've got those targets, they've got the coordinates, and they could launch those missiles at American targets in the Middle East. That's one option.
And I think it's important to stress there what you just said, that those missiles were designed specifically to target American interests in the Middle East, right? So people think that people hate America on account of Israel, that Israel's coming to defend, America's coming to defend Israel only. But really you see here that the Iranians, they had weapons specifically designed to attack American targets.
100%. 100%. And other targets are, by the way, the Gulf states themselves, their capitals, their oil refineries. They already attacked the Saudis back in 2019. So they have that option. Now, the second option is to try and basically close the Straits of Hormuz. This is something that the Iranian parliament reportedly approved, but the decision maker here is not the Iranian parliament. It's, first of all, Ayatollah Khamenei, the IRGC, and what they call the Supreme National Security Council of Iran. That's the actual forum where their decisions are made. That's kind of like the Iranian Security Cabinet. Now, if they try to close the Straits of Hormuz by mining it, by basically, using what's left of their navy to try and disrupt all the maritime traffic, the goal of that would be to disrupt global energy traffic and to cause oil prices to spike worldwide and basically to spread out the punishment everywhere around the world. If they try to do that, I think that would result in a massive American strike on Iranian naval capabilities. I think that President Trump made that clear when he said that there are other targets and the Iranians should think very carefully before they act. So those are the two main options that they have regarding retaliation avenues that are not related to Israel. As far as Israel is concerned, again, I think they're firing everything they can at us, but we have to be on the lookout for those international terrorist networks, which Hezbollah is also a part of, because those are soft targets and those are harder to defend. And it's very realistic that they could try to go for something like that at some point. So we have to be very vigilant.
What do we know about the coordinated timing between the United States and Israel? How much coordination has there been? Were each side, just playing everybody, with disinformation, misinformation, not letting on what they knew? What was America waiting for Israel to accomplish before it decided to do this attack? What are some things we know about how often these militaries are in touch with one another on this?
So, I mean, first of all, at the military level, the level of coordination is not only good, but it's growing. That's what IDF officials are telling us. And because Israel is part of CENTCOM, because it joined CENTCOM, I believe, back in 2021, CENTCOM is the American military organization that's responsible for the Middle East. Before that, Israel was in EUCOM, which is the American command in Europe. So once Israel entered CENTCOM, the coordination between U.S. military in the Middle East and the IDF reached new heights. So we saw them actually train for joint strikes in Iran. That's something that they made no secret of. There was a joint training by the air forces. There is constant intelligence sharing. The chief of staff of the IDF speaks with the Joint Chiefs of Staffs in the U.S. I think on a daily basis. I think that they're having video calls on a daily basis. So really, the level of coordination is phenomenal. But at the end of the day, you also have the question that you asked, which is, at one point, did the U.S. decide to do this? And when was Israel in the know? I don't think we'll get any definitive answers, but there might be some clues, right? Because when Israel decided to strike, clearly it notified the U.S. ahead of time. The U.S. was not caught off guard by Israel's strikes, and the U.S. continued to, let's say, take part in a certain amount of deception because it already had seen that the Iranians were not serious about negotiations. The Trump administration already received Israeli intelligence showing that the Iranians were simply using the negotiations as a ruse to break out to nuclear weapons, that they were about to pass the point of no return. And so at that point, I think the US made the decision to allow Israel to greenlight Israel's attack plans and not to get in the way at all. So that's already one example of the US, basically being in full coordination with Israel. Now, the second time appears to be this. This U.S. attack, when did they make the decision? We don't know. I haven't seen any definitive reports about when the U.S. made this decision. I think that President Trump was definitely encouraged by the success of the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli operation. I think he likes, quote unquote, winners. He likes to be part of success stories, and he sees that the Israeli operation is going well. I think that definitely helped him make the decision. But also, I think, the right people told President Trump, look, this is an international threat. This is a threat to American security. This is a threat to the entire free world. The Iranians are building intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have plans to build that. That would threaten the U.S. They're already threatening cities in Europe. They want to have global influence. This is not an Israeli problem only. Israel is just the first in line. So I think that understanding filtered through as well, and that enabled, I think, President Trump to push back against the isolationists who were trying to tell him that, this is an Israeli problem only, in very sort of short-sighted, narrow view of this war. So I think there's a whole range of factors here, and I'm sure that we'll find out more as time goes by about just how closely the two countries were coordinated.
Now, how does this conflict come to a close from a military perspective? At what point does Israel, the United States say, the objectives have been met, it's time to call it a day on this? We saw, for example, if Hezbollah provides any kind of a guideline here, Israel had basically filed down about 80% of the capabilities and then got into some kind of a negotiated ceasefire. Is that what Israel's looking for? At what point can you get to that? And if Iran doesn't come to the table to negotiate some kind of a ceasefire, at what point does Israel say, enough is enough, we've done all we can do and we're going to stop?
So I think that once Israel sees that the capabilities that it's aiming to remove, the existential nuclear, missile, and proxy programs have been taken back to a sufficient level, and I think this is being very closely tracked. I think there's a real checklist that's following the damage here. I think once Israel sees that it reached the goals that it wanted to reach in this war, it would be happy to disengage. And I think that the Iranians will want to disengage as well because, there's a lot of targets in Iran that haven't been hit yet, primarily fuel ports and the economic pillars of this regime. So if we reach a situation where Israel says, I've hit all the targets I wanted to hit, I'm disengaging, and the Iranians continue to fire ballistic missiles, assuming that they still can, that will, I think, push Israel to start looking at the targets that can really destabilize and shake up the economic foundations of this regime and grind the Iranian economy to a halt. And I don't think that the Iranian regime will want to go there because it's been caught off guard. It's in disarray. So in terms of the negotiations, I think that's less important to Israel right now because the main thing is that even if negotiations do start up again between the U.S. and Iran, even if that somehow happens, the most important thing from Israel's perspective is that the United States will have a separate agreement with Israel in which Israel will be authorized and legitimized to take military action in Iran if and when it sees Iran trying to rebuild missiles or nuclear capabilities. very similar to what happened in Hezbollah, right? You remember there was a ceasefire reached and there was a side agreement that Israel is now applying on a daily basis that is authorizing, from an American perspective, Israel to move in and take out Hezbollah's violations of any agreement. If a similar arrangement can be reached in Iran, I think Israel would be happy with that, and that would be sufficient for Israel to end the war when it reaches the conclusion of its objectives. And the last thing I'll say, the elephant in the room, what we haven't yet spoken of, is, of course, the prospect of regime change, of regime falling. Now, I'll just say that the only ones who can actually institute regime change are the Iranian people themselves. But I think that there's a real opportunity here, Alex, a real opportunity for the people of Iran to make their move, because this regime has never been weaker since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And all of its claims have been exposed as hollow and false. They've lost control of the situation. They're in deep, deep distress and disarray. After this war ends, we could see the start of a rebellion. It wouldn't surprise me if we see the sparks of an uprising after this war.
Well, you talk about the Iranian people, and they should take the step of overthrowing their regime. But we did see Israel target Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def and others inside of Gaza. We saw Israel target Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. We saw Israel take out Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and his deputies in southern Lebanon. We've seen Israel target Houthi leadership in Yemen. And we saw Israel already target top military commanders in Iran, top nuclear scientists in Iran. What is preventing Israel, if provided that they know where Khamenei is hiding, of dropping some kind of ordinance on wherever that underground location is similar to what they did against Nasrallah and Beirut?
So the operational answer, I don't know what's stopping Israel from doing that. If we know where Ayatollah Khamenei is, then my assumption is that nothing operationally or physically is stopping those munitions from being dropped, and that it's a political decision or a tactical consideration that's prevented that from happening until now. And by the way, this could change at any moment. So I don't know what the reasoning is. Perhaps it's to allow the Iranian regime some sort of climb down, some sort of off-ramp. If that's the calculation, by the way, I think that's mistaken. And I think that if the whereabouts of Ayatollah Khamenei are known, he should be eliminated, because he is the driving force, him and his inner circle, of most of Iran's destructive actions in the Middle East and beyond over so many years. So if there's an opportunity, I don't think that we should hesitate. That's just my personal perspective. But my assumption is that if it's not happening, it's because there's a desire to give the Iranian regime some sort of off-ramp to be able to sort of, hobble its way off the highway of this war. And that might not save it, by the way, because then they would still have to answer to the Iranian people. So that, maybe the thinking is, hey, even if Khamenei survives this war, he's he's probably not going to survive the Iranian people. That could be a calculation that's at play. These are unknown considerations. The Security Cabinet has its own deliberations. We're dealing with partial pictures, here in the public sphere, and we don't have the full picture. So we'll just have to wait and see patiently how that part plays out.
Well, from Israel's perspective, certainly 9 days that have been overwhelmingly successful on the offensive level, including the participation of the United States. On the defensive level, Israel definitely absorbing many blows, but significantly less blows than I believe any assessment as to what Iran could do to harm Israel, and Israel performing very well on the defensive front, and also the Israeli people just demonstrating extraordinary resiliency, which I think is a number one component of Israeli defense, the ability of the Israeli people to give the military and the political leadership the space to continue doing this by following the commands of the home front to get into shelters, to stay in the shelters, and to recognize that this is just the last component of this 600-day war that was fought first by Iran's proxies against Israel, now by Iran again. Certainly, we're not at the end of the story. There will be more updates to come in the days ahead. We don't know how Iran is going to react to this. All indications from their public statements are that they're going to meet what they've received with resolve and keep going. That's not necessarily prudent on their part, but that doesn't mean that we're operating with people that would operate the way we would if we were in their shoes. That's very, very important to understand the region that we're in. Anyways, Yaakov Lappin, military analyst for Jewish News Syndicate, thank you so much for being with us. And God bless all of the Israeli soldiers and pilots that are flying these sorties. And God, may you protect the home front here in Israel, and may we see a swift end to this war, which hopefully will then usher in an era of peace for Israel and the entire region.
Thank you, Alex. It's always a pleasure to be with you on these emergency webinars. Thank you very much.
And hopefully we won't need too many more of them. It's been 600 days. And with that, we have been just following this war nonstop for the last 600 days, fighting the battle of narratives, which is really where Israel's enemies think that they have a significant advantage over Israel. And we just have had report after report, nonstop, going almost 24/7. What we do is not free. It costs a lot of money to operate this battlefront as well. We are a 501c3 U.S.-based nonprofit organization. If you value the work that we're doing, if you've been following us, and I please ask you to follow us more, come to the website, download the application from the app stores, sign up to the email newsletter, share our reports with others, but also if you can make a donation, meaningful donations of any amount, small, large, 2 figures, 3, 4, 5, 6 figures, whatever you can do. It goes a long way to helping us continue to grow and expand as the fastest growing Jewish media organization in the world right now. So thank you again for being with us, and we will catch up with you soon.